Well, while we have you here, we want to move on to a number of other issues, principally related to the murder that we saw in Athens last week of a young student, Laken Riley, by an undocumented immigrant. Representative Al, I was down in the Capitol yesterday, and after an entire session of really no mention of immigration at all, that really seemed to be all anybody was talking about, especially on the Republican side. You're such a high-profile member of the Asian American community for Democrats locally and nationally. What's your thinking on some of these measures that look like they're coming forward that may direct law enforcement about how they have to interact with undocumented immigrants? Right now, I think some law enforcement have a lot of discretion about how they want to approach that issue. It looks like they may be losing some of that discretion.
Right. First, about the incident at UGA, the murder that took place. That is an unspeakable tragedy. I give so much sympathy to the families. We're thinking of them. And the perpetrator of that crime, the alleged perpetrator, is someone who had a criminal history and probably should not have been here, right? We do not do ourselves any service to run away from that issue and that individual case. What I worry about in this political environment, and it's already clear before this happened that immigration was going to be sort of a leading electoral point and a cleavage point of social division that the Republican Party was going to run on, is that this gives folks who are more, have more, partisan interest, a way to paint immigrants and the immigrant community with quite a broad brush, right? And this push towards collective punishment of a whole group of people is something that I worry about, right? So putting the individual murder to the side and that perpetrator to the side, when we require law enforcement to have more punitive measures or to report undocumented folks, what I worry about and what I spoke to some bill sponsors about who are pushing this type of legislation is that we disincentivize some undocumented immigrants from being able to report when they themselves are the victim of crime. For example, violent crime, for example, injury, child abuse. I've, as a medical practitioner, seen many times that undocumented children, families, are loath to come into the ER even when they have suffered a critical injury because they're worried about being reported, right? So I think that this is I will give them the benefit of the doubt, the unintended effects of having painting with too broad a brush when you aim to be quite stringent and punitive for undocumented citizens. And I hope that as we move forward, certainly immigration is something we need to look at. It is not, I need to mention, the purview of state legislature to make immigration law. That is a federal issue. But I hope that we do not punish people who may need our help as legislators.
Let me ask you about one specific piece of legislation that could move forward, and that's the legislature very well might look at demanding that communities like Athens, for example, follow the regulation what's 287G, which requires that when local law enforcement picks up an undocumented immigrant, they be held until the feds can be brought in to process that individual, because it's the federal responsibility to deal with undocumented immigrants. Athens happens to be a city that has not participated in 287G, as are any number of cities around the state. Do you think that it is a mistake to come up with state legislation that would set some sort of penalty in terms of funding for a city that did not comply with the local police requirement to contact the feds when they have an immigrant in their custody?
I do think it's a mistake. And for the same reasons that we just discussed, is that when you create this system that quite broadly penalizes people who are maybe seeking asylum in the midst of seeking asylum, which, by the way, it's a legal avenue for people to enter the United States and for a pathway to citizenship, that you create what is essentially a very unsafe environment for members of our community who may be working jobs, who may be contributing to our economy, who may be victims of assault or violence or illness, right, from being able to leave their houses because they are afraid of being picked up and criminalized and deported, right? So I think that, obviously, I'm not going to minimize the importance of looking at immigration policy and immigration reform as part of our federal, legislative priorities. But I think that having an overly punitive approach to all undocumented immigrants is going to have a huge unintended effect. And I don't think it behooves us to be so reactive in the short term in what is really quite a broad issue for our state, which has a very large immigrant community.